training that you made the decision that you wanted to be a painter versus an architect or go into design?
Yeah. Well, it wasn't exactly either or situation, but a significant experience for me was, which I look back on as being one of those places in one's life where you come to a fork in the road and you take this one rather than that one. And I had an experience where I was in my 5th year in university. Actually, it was about my 8th year because it took that long to get through. And because I changed majors and done this and done that. But I was studying landscape architecture, and I was getting a 5-year degree. And it was landscape architecture. And it was the very final project, and I was halfway through it, and I had a lot of work to do on it. And it was like 2 weeks to the end of the school, and I had a Sunday. I went over to the school. I was in North Carolina, a School of Design at Raleigh. And I remember I walked up the stairs to go to the design studio, and there was a breezeway there. It connected 2 buildings. And I walked up there all by myself and nobody around. And at the top of the stairs, I was going to turn right and go to the design studio to finish this work that I didn't really want to do, but, you know. And I got to the top of the stairs, and it was as if this kind of hand just took me and just turned me left instead of right. And I turned left and went through the door, down the hall, and turned into the painting studio where I was also, you know, had a painting studio class. And I went in there. I spent the whole afternoon painting rather than doing my design, which was supposed to get done so I could graduate. And so there was a strong impulse to move in that direction, and I sort of remember that as a real experience, and it's also sort of symbolic of kind of where my mind was going. But I did get the degree, and I started teaching in design, landscape architecture the next year, but I was trying to start painting, and then my daughter was born, and then I was by the next spring, a year later, it was we want you to stay and teach, and and then somebody else came and said, well, we want you to come and work up at this really top design firm in Michigan, and I thought about it, and I didn't really want to do either. And they were both, major professional successes, you might say, either one of them. And I had this little family that's getting started, and anybody in their right mind would have just taken one of those, And so obviously I was not in my right mind. And I decided that I would rather really felt much more comfortable with my children growing up on the coast of California, where I grew up, because I knew how it was, and the freedoms here, and the kind of running barefoot, and near the coast and in the ocean, and so on. And so, and I had this feeling of I really would rather be a painter than a professional designer working in that world, all that complications and even dressing up, being dressed up to be in that world, it was, to me, I didn't like to wear ties, and I didn't like to wear fancy shoes, and it was just a gut feeling of not wanting to be in that kind of indoor professional world. And so I decided to not take either one of those offers and to just bail out, or we said drop out. And so we got in our Volkswagen bus and filled it with stuff and a little child and another one coming, and headed for Santa Cruz, 1964. And with the intention of just living simple life and raising the kids here and being an artist, whatever that was, because that was new for me.
Yeah.
You see, that wasn't something that I had been thinking about doing or even had the imagination of being that person when I was younger.
Right.
Of course, I was 30 years old.
So once you got to Santa Cruz and you were settled and whatnot, how did you approach beginning your path as a painter?
Well, I had started back before that, and with some influences and ideas, and so that when I got here, I had a sort of bundle of thoughts and ideas and notions and so on that were just in there, and one of the major challenges was the physical part of it, because up to that point, I like to say I was institutionalized. You see, all through I've been in school, in a safe home as far as growing up secure, and then I went to universities, and I went to the military, and I came out, and I was still in the university, and there's all kinds of stuff that you have. You have heat, you have places to work, you get cheap supplies, you have shops, you have people to talk to, libraries. It doesn't cost much if you don't have to pay for any of that stuff. I mean, you pay tuition, but I mean, you're not paying rent for your studio. You're not paying rent. They're free pencils. They got a deal on canvas, for about a tenth of what it costs out in the world. And so, all of a sudden, I was faced with every pencil I needed. I had to go buy or find somewhere. It just wasn't sitting there. Somebody, and there wasn't any cheap canvas. Or I had to buy the wood for stretchers, or I had to get the place to work in, and all these things would cost money. Oh, I had to get some lights. Used to be lights were always there, and so setting up myself as an artist meant that every move I made, I had to figure out how to do that in a physical sense,
Right.
and that cost money, took effort. And then there was a family, which, and our resources were quickly diminishing. So it was following a sense, an urge, and even a sense of calling, and yet being in the midst of family life and so on.
So how does the work that you produced during that period of your life, how does that reflect everything that was going on around you and that you had to experience and deal with, and then that physical obstruction of art not being in that free space to produce art?
Let's see. What did I do? How can I get at that? I think that, when I was back when I first started painting, which was in a class just after I got out of the service at Occidental College, and we were talking beforehand how that experience of having a teacher say, look at this field of green grass, and then what color is it? And I said, well, we said green, and he said, look again, and I started seeing all this color in there, and I realized that I had the ability to directly see what's there, and I had very good vision, and I didn't realize I was using my vision that way. I mean, as an artist does, and he helped me see that. Oh, you can look at this, and really see it, and then somehow that seeing was fuel or material for expression. And so that was another little event that was kind of important, and that because I became conscious, aware that I was seeing,
Right.
and that seeing was somehow connected to being a visual artist. I mean, it seems silly to say that, but to actually see something, not your idea of it, but to see it, you know. And I started to realize that I could do that, or I did that, and I didn't even know I was doing that. So, and then I went back to North Carolina to finish up my education, and that was the first time I ever took a regular studio painting course. And in that course I was taught by, or my teacher was a recognized painter who was recognized in New York by the main people who do that. And essentially he just didn't tell me anything. I mean, he just sort of a couple things, but he just let you alone, and that was very valuable. And he'd come around and say, look at it, and kind of nod and say, let's keep going, just like that. And so I realized that what I was putting on the canvas, which was what I think be characterized as abstract expressionist painting, I realized I could do that, and somebody was nodding their head yes. It was amazing,
Right.
amazing. The acknowledgement, just that simple nod of the head was an enormous acknowledgement to me. And I can do this, and somebody says yes. And I respect him because, he's a real painter, and he's being shown in important places, and and all that. And so it was somebody of I guess you might say, authority.
Right.
And so I painted some more, and he'd shake his head, And it was, I thought, well, I like this, and it's somebody's finding it of value, and they know something about this world.
So when you got to Santa Cruz, were you venturing into abstract expressionism, or had you already?
Well, I
from
went,
that?
so what happened was that it wasn't very long, I was doing that there, and I had studied color theory back in my architecture training, kind of color theory, period, for an application in architecture. And so I really responded to that. I liked that. And so then I got back to North Carolina, and so when something in color theory would come up, I would be kind of pay attention. And that's when I became aware of Joseph Albers, the painter, because he did a very, very beautiful study on color theory, and his paintings were almost like color theory, very simple, just squares of color in a square color, and yet there was something very profound about them, and very I liked them. I was moved by that approach, and so I started to see color, pure color. And I started to think about that, and I realized that when I was painting with all this gestural technique, that the textures and the movement in the paintings were getting in the way of the color, so I began to refine and refine. I mean, to take out the texture and get closer and closer to where my surfaces were just surfaces of color, and I responded to that. I liked that, and so all these things together led me, so by the time I got here, I was more interested in fields of color than anything, than just gesture painting,
Right.
or even representational painting, or anything like that. I was just liked the work with color.
Right.
So all these things were in my mind, and I didn't know quite how to proceed. And so first I was just painting, I painted an area of color on a field, and so it was sort of like Albers, but it wasn't the same. It wasn't square on square and square, but it was looking at the two colors relating to one another. Then there was this other very important discovery, which everybody who studies color theory finds out, is that, and one day, I think it was, I can't remember when it was, but early on in my color theory study, that color is not isolated. You can't talk about color in an isolated way. It's got to be in an environment. And you put this one color in one environment, say you put a very gray red on a slightly, say a warm environment, and it even starts to look a little green, because of it. Then if you change the ground to the opposite, then it really looks redder. And if you compare them like this, you say they're different colors. But if you take the colors and move them over and just compare them together, I'll say next to white, they're the same color. So that discovery, which is a very simple and one that everybody who studies this sees, and it's kind of like it's surprising that it's relational. Color is not absolute. It's in relation, and so that was a very important discovery for me. So that I started to work with that just visually, right. and so right away. I found myself painting geometrically. In other words, creating containers for color rather than trying to create some kind of image that looked like something, or it got to be, it was just a container for color. And then, so these were pretty much geometrical or rectangular forms, simple. It's really fascinating with this color. And so I was dealing with technique, and it was early on, and I was trying to use oils, and so there was a lot of things I didn't know. I was just trying to figure it out. Like that. And then...
So for you, those simple forms, those simple geometric forms, is that the best possible situation for the color to come out? Is that the easiest way for you to manipulate it?
Well, it seemed to be, because it remove a lot of other visual influences. Like if you draw a picture of a face and put eyes in it and so on, everybody looks at the face and says, "Oh, that's a face," and and then they get all kinds of associations. It looks like this. It looks like somebody, whatever, and it's very powerful. And they've forgotten what color it was, right. or it's colored, they put color on it, like applied. And I want to get away from that. I didn't want to have the sense that that color was an application, but that it was the subject.
Right, the main focal point.
It was what it was all about. And if the color didn't work, the painting didn't work. It wasn't about squares or rectangles or anything. It was about the color. So, but in my way of approaching it was to get very simple, just to have a simple form or simple shape. And but that, I quickly went through that saying, well, what, I need to there's something else here, because there's a special condition, unless I just paint the whole canvas, say red or green or whatever, just the whole canvas, I still get to the edge. And the edge, it bothered me a lot, that there was a special condition there at the edge. And what do you do about the edge? Because you come up and then it's there, and you got to think about it, and you got to relate it to something else.
Right. How to transcend that.
What is that edge all about? So I spent a lot of time on edge, and what happened was I said, well, I wonder if I just break off an edge. And so you can imagine maybe a rectangle here, and then take off an edge, maybe just a band of color, and move it over just a little bit, as if you sliced it off and then had it there.
Right.
and you can shove it back on, but and then I did that, and then I had this band of color, and I thought, and I looked at it, and I realized all of a sudden something else happened between the edge I cut off and the field of here, that inside between those, that slot in there, which was the ground color, had changed, because it was influenced by the colors around it,
Right.
and it looked different than, it was the same color as around out here, but it looked different in there because of these relationship of these colors on both sides.
That sounds similar to what we were talking about previously in terms of the diagonal splitting and then there being that space, and the space in between once like the atoms split is where...
Well, I had never thought of that before. Thank you. That's a good point.
So it's a constant like...
Yeah, it came
revolution that
light,
you're
and then
talking
something else happened. There was a space, and in the space, that really intrigued me. The fact that I didn't change the color in the space physically, but visually, optically, it was different.
Right.
And that was pretty interesting. So I thought, well, what if I mean, kind of through a progression of paintings, wonder if I just made that rectangle really a series of bands of color, and define the rectangle that way. So I started to do that, bands of color, like this, I think vertically. And sure enough, in between there was all this liveliness, and it wasn't, it was kind of alive. It seemed to have its own life in between there.
Right.
I thought, that's really interesting,
Do you think that that's like a constant regeneration that happens in your work? I mean, you're discussing the beginnings of your art career, and then previously we were talking about more the later pieces. And in both series, there's that empty space, that just is given birth by a progression as an artist. Do you think that's a constant thing that is always in your work?
Well, I like that notion, the way you put it. So there must be something there.
Right.
Space, yeah, space has been real important in my life. When in architecture, I think I look at architecture spatially. That's the way I work or see or evolve my architecture is from a spatial side of things, and then what we call form and space, the things, the walls, the ceilings, the stuff that we look at that modulates the space kind of falls into place because of the nature of the space that's being formed. What is the function of the space? What is the kind of experience you want? You want to compress it or expand it, or whatever, direct it. So then you stick something here and something there, and so in some ways, whether it's a brick wall or a wood wall or a glass wall or something, I mean, that's less important to me than the space.
Right.
In a way, I come from that, and so that side. So I think in painting and that space is important.
Right. It seems like you manipulate boundaries, and especially with like your mediums. So that manipulation of the boundaries often for you in your art like creates a certain space, a space where you've gotten to the point where your art has evolved, and then you move on to another series.
Yeah. Yeah, you're right. It gets to something evolves, and maybe that's a good way of seeing it. That this space opens up, and then it's done.
Right.
And then something else happens. Not so much filling the space up. I mean, I don't like to fill space up. I like to actually create space. In our Western world, they're always putting things in space. I mean, they make a beautiful space and then they stick something in the middle of it.
Right.
Because you got to have a fountain in the middle of the space, or you got to have something there, or else it's empty.
Right.
And I don't understand space as empty. To me, it's not empty. It's full. And so when I so it makes follows that I'd be interested in color fields of color.
Definitely.
Which is interesting. I just thought about that when I was mentioning when I first started, and we were looking at a field of color.
Right.
I never put that together before. Linguistically, maybe that means something.
Right. It almost sounds like your art takes on the nature of like indigenous or non-Western cultures, where their religious and spiritual practices are less dogmatic, and for them there's a constant regeneration. Whereas in Western school of thought, there's always a beginning and an end.
Oh yeah.
And it's not.
No,
like
I don't.
circular.
I like the the lotus,
Right.
that one where the lotus keeps unfolding and unfolding. I mean, like that, and to me, it's just another set of petals unfolding. There's no beginning and end to it.
Right.
Although there are, discrete, if you want to put it that way. I mean, most folks, and particularly in the world of measure, I mean, where they want to get a handle on who somebody is. They want to say, well, that's the beginning of that phase, and that's the end. And I don't. I think everything is related.
Definitely.
So you're right. I have much. I think my associations are much stronger in that direction, and
Right.
definitely in the sense that everything is related. Yeah.
Right. So if you take that analogy of the lotus flower, for you, that each series of painting for you, or each stage in your life as a painter, would be another leaf, like unfolding and unfolding and unfolding.
Yeah, more of the petals like this.
Right.
The whole petals unfold, and then it comes up and then like this and like this, like
Definitely.
that. And so more like that than a single leaf. It's more that all like that. It may be, that there's that analogy of the lotus. There's a lotus flower, but it can unfold in the mud, the bottom of the pond,
Right.
which is, one place it can. And maybe most of us are there somewhere in that mud or that murky water, and then it unfolds there in the murky water, and then it starts to get clearer water and unfolds, and then, eventually, if everything is really clear, it can unfold in space and its full potential, you see, is
Right.
realized. And so.
So how do you view each series of paintings, or particular stage in life? Do you feel that there's one stage in your life as a painter that is representational of the murky water, or the separate unfolding of leaves?
I don't think it's that. That correspondence is not that clear straight across. It's like this and like this and like
Right.
this. I mean, I suppose one could. That's an interesting thought, though, is to develop a theory that it's like the chakras, and that you begin and you're here, and then you go there, and you go there, and then you go there, and we could probably do that and create a whole school, and then we could charge people a lot of money on weekends and come, and we could deal with first their lower chakra, that one, and then if they pay enough money, of course, more and more.
Right.
Well, you got us just in time. We were just
totally.
about ready to.
We're getting off the tangent.